Tripoli in turmoil. Could a new UN-brokered truce bring hope for peace between fighting factions in Libya? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the fighting in Tripoli. Libya has been in limbo ever since the overthrow of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Rival powers vie for control, and peace talks after peace talks have failed. This past week, fighting in the capital has killed more than 40 civilians and forced the Tripoli-based government to declare a state of emergency. Clashes broke out when a militia group from the south pitted themselves against forces loyal to the UN-backed government. The UN stepped in to broker another ceasefire, the third to be declared in less than a week. But with so much chaos, what can bring stability to Libya? Haider Abbasi reports.
This is what happens when fighting breaks out in Libya. Homes and businesses are damaged, and civilians suffer as armed militias try to destroy each other on the streets. After a week of gun battles in the capital Tripoli, at least 61 people have been killed. Many more have been wounded. A truce arranged by the UN has put an end to the latest violence. But ceasefires in Libya don't always hold.
The current security situation in the Libyan capital remains volatile and unpredictable and is restricting humanitarian access for humanitarian agencies both to displaced Libyans and to refugees affected by the clashes.
The fighting began in the final week of August when the 7th Brigade launched a surprise attack on groups that are tied to the government in Tripoli. The 7th Brigade accuses the groups of stealing public money. This has been the story of Libya since 2011, when former leader Muammar Gaddafi was removed from power in a popular revolution. The same militias that helped topple Gaddafi turned their guns on each other, and there hasn't been a political authority since. Observers describe the situation as chaos. Libya has effectively been split into two. The military commander Khalifa Haftar backs the regional parliament in eastern Libya. It has the support of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Russia. In the west, Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj leads the rival UN-backed Government of National Accord, or GNA. Although the GNA is officially in charge in Tripoli, it's the militias that really control the capital. Corruption, a lack of basic services, and the violence has made living in Libya a misery. Thousands of people have fled the country. Many have made the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean to find refuge in Europe. The leaders of the rival parliaments met in Paris for the first time last year. Haftar and Sarraj agreed to try and hold elections in December, but with no functioning institutions and a toothless government in Tripoli, it's difficult to see that happening. How can Libya assert control over the militias? And even if elections are held, will they help unite the country? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
With me here in the studio now is Abdulkader Assad. He's a senior writer at the Libya Observer. In London, we have Jumal Gamati. He's the head of Libya's Taghyir Party and a member of the UN-backed political dialogue group. And in Benghazi, we have Libya specialist Mansour El-Kakhia. Gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Abdulkader Assad, let me begin with you. Third ceasefire called in a week. The other two failed. Are you confident that this one will hold?
Well, actually, the ceasefire is just like, like blowing in an empty lane, let's say. Now, we have a malicious control on the government in Tripoli. That's what everybody should understand at this point. Now, what we have in Tripoli is not like something that the UN or the UN support mission can solve. It's just like beyond that, because if you look at the meeting that the UNSMIL held it in Zawiya. It didn't even dare to hold it in Tripoli. So why being afraid? So we have here like militias or armed groups. They are vying for power and legitimacy. They're not like, they're not there to establish or pave the way for elections or constitution. No, they just want the two groups, they allied. They want to take control of the places and locations and the camps that the other armed groups are taking in Tripoli so that they can negotiate later and they can be part of the government of national accord that is really, let's say, clawing its way in Tripoli and taking its control by the militias.
Right.
So the militias are controlling the decision-making, they're controlling the state institutions, they are doing everything in Tripoli. And just at one point, let me refer you to a study by Small Arms Survey in April. It predicted what's happening in Tripoli now. It said that militias have turned into cartel, mafia network. They are spanning everything. They are controlling everything in Tripoli. The government and UNISMIL or United Nations Support Mission have nothing to do. And the ceasefire, I think, is just like a formal agreement so that can calm everybody until they can figure out what's going on.
Jumail Gamati, the militias are calling the shots. Is that how you see it?
Oh, absolutely. There is no doubt about that. And the recent episode of violence is symptomatic of this control. And it's also symptomatic of the failure over the last 7 years of those who led the political scene to actually initiate any sort of institution building or state building, especially institutions concerned with security. Rebuilding the army, rebuilding the police, rebuilding all the other security institutions that should be in charge of security of the citizens and security of the state institutions. Instead, we had a vacuum which was filled by militias. Militias have fought against each other and have fought over the control of the capital, Tripoli, which is the biggest prize in Libya. And at one stage, we had militias from one city, then from another. And over the last 2 years, they were mainly for militias from within Tripoli itself. They have extended their control over almost all institutions, ministries, state companies, airports, ports, sovereign funds, you name it. And unfortunately, some of them, under the pretense that they are guarding and protecting these institutions, they have started to exert pressure and to gain special benefits, economic benefits, financial benefits, appointing their members to high jobs, and also at the expense of the ordinary citizens who couldn't get their cash and liquidity from banks and so on.
Okay, yeah, and when we look at it, the 7th Brigade, the Tripoli Revolutionaries Brigades and Nawasi Brigade, these are not the only militias at play. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Mansour, you're in the east, you're in Benghazi. First of all, let me know how people in the east, under different control, are viewing what's happening in the west and the conflict and the clashes happening in Tripoli.
Well, to the truth, all the people I've spoken to, they're very sorry that this is taking place in the West. But it was a foregone conclusion. And if you remember on your show, I said the same thing 2 years ago. This is not a government of national accord. It's a government of national discord. And the problem is that the United Nations doesn't seem to understand this. Mr. Sarraj and his government should not be in Tripoli to be under the thumb of the militias. He should move out of it. Not in Tunisia. He should come to the east, at least to some degree. Okay, you might say that Haftar is a militia. Okay, but we have one militia, not 50, not 100. And so it seems to me that all we can do over here is empathize. We say, we're sorry, but we have seen what the militias have done. I mean, I went to visit in Benghazi just the day before yesterday. My God, the destruction. The destruction was awful. I don't want to see Tripoli the same way. But there is no other way except if this guy leaves that government out of there and get out of Tripoli. That's the only way to do it.
Okay, is that the solution, Juma?
Absolutely not. For Sarraj to go to the east, he will be under the same control except different militias. He will be under the control of Haftar, his cousins and his sons, which they are doing already. They have been doing to the Atni government in Al-Bayda. They have been doing to the parliament in Tobruk. Aguila Saleh, supposed to be the head of parliament and the highest and the most senior political figure in Libya. He is supposed to be the supreme commander of the army. Aguila Saleh is supposed to be the boss of Haftar and his sons, yet it's the other way around. Haftar is the boss. With his boot, he controls and orders everybody. So it's not going to be any better. But that's not the solution. The solution is to actually rebuild institutions concerned with security. Police, army, intelligence, all other solutions. And it's a failure of all Libyans. It's the failure of the international community. It's a failure of the UN. And it's a failure because of the divisions we've been having all these years. And it's also because of the detrimental, very destructive regional interference we had, especially from some Arab countries, which have been fueling these divisions and these conflicts, which allowed these militias. Which countries?
Yes.
All of them, many. Egypt, the Emiratis. Some even accuse Qatar and Turkey of giving political support to one side against the other. Whatever, any negative, destructive interference from wherever it comes, from Italy, from France, it's not helping. It's actually destroying. It's helping to deepen the conflict in Libya and prolonging the suffering, and it should stop. The international community should now revisit its attitude and its strategies towards Libya, and should be all aligned to help the Libyans and not to tear them apart. And I think that's where the international community have failed us badly. Nobody is happy about the militias exploiting the government or institutions, whatever they are. By the way, they are doing exactly the same in the East. Haftar's sons are doing the same. Haftar's cousins are doing the same. So it's not any better. So no one can brag about the East being the ideal state that we are aspiring to, and that the West is a total failure.
Abdulkader, after all these years, all these billions spent, after all the interference, after Gaddafi fell, and after Libyans were helped by the international community to get rid of him, where are we now? What's going on? How would you explain this to somebody from another planet trying to understand what's going on in Libya?
Actually, what's going on in Libya is plain and simple. I agree with the guest, Jamal Igmadi, that it's not a solution to go to the east or to the south. It's all malicious control. The solution is to have a Libyan call. Like it's not like a call that is coming from the international community or the UNSML. They facilitate work, and they are doing an assistance in Libya, but they cannot give the call the shots. What Libya needs now, what's happening in Libya, is a militias controlling everything from the central bank of Libya, which is the top sovereign, let's say, institution, to decision-making in the government of national accord, which actually at the first place came to Tripoli through a deal with these militias. So you cannot separate the government of national accord from the militias. What we need now is a Libyan call to dissolve or disband these militias.
Yeah, but who's going to give up their guns first? I'm not going to give up my guns if you don't give yours first. If he doesn't give up his first, nobody's going to put down their weapons first.
But we're looking at help from the international community. Let's make the Security Council, the UN Security Council, commit these militias and these armed groups, east, west, and south, to lay down their arms. And let's make the Libyan
lay down
government.
Your arms, you get swallowed up, you get killed.
No,
by the other guy.
I mean, they said the UNSML yesterday said it will commit the warring parties to cease fire in Tripoli. Can it commit those warring parties to lay down their arms and be part of a like, let's say, a national army, a real national army, not a militia or tribal national army like in the east, or a militia control in the west? No, a real national army. Let's make the Security Council issue a resolution that commit all these people. They know them. Okay. They know the militias. They know the names.
Okay. So as things stand, looking at the actual people, because you've got a nice big idea. Looking at the UN envoy Ghassan Salami, does he have the capability to actually get these people on the table and to say, listen, put down your weapons?
Absolutely.
So?
I mean, he has to brief the UN Security Council, as he does every month. He has to brief them and put it on the table. We have a malicious control in the east, south, and west of Libya. We need the UN Security Council to step in and take a decision and force those militias to lay down their arms. Okay. It's as easy as that. I mean, it doesn't take it doesn't take years.
Forcing them comes with the threat of some sort of stick, right? With the threat of some sort of international intervention.
I mean, let's say use whatever at hand. I mean, use the same method that you used to reach the ceasefire.
Okay. Mansour al-Kakhia, the other two gentlemen are not as keen as you are, perhaps, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said for all its failings, there's a semblance of unity in the East. At least, as you said, it's under one militia. The other two gentlemen question that. Tell me what's so special about the East vis-a-vis the West, or are you just maybe gloating because the West is in chaos at the moment?
No, not at all. For me, it's the lesser of all of the two evils. I mean, and it's okay. I understand their concerns about Haftar. I have been hearing this nonsense for the last God knows how many years. Okay, stay in the system that you're in today, with militias dominating your lives by taking your money, determining what you buy, what you don't buy, what you pay, what you don't pay. Go ahead and do it. This is fine with me. You want to be a separatist government? Go to a separate country too. I'm not thinking this way. I'm thinking in terms, what is the possibility of a government operating? Okay, fine. You can operate here because there's a belief that your government can operate in the East far more successfully than will operate in the West. You want to remove those militias. With what? You're quite right. What are you going to remove them for? Unless you bring in an army from the outside to occupy Libya, they're not going to go away. It seems to me that ultimately we have to choose the lesser of the two evils. The lesser of the evils is the East, is Haftar. You don't like him, that's okay. But Haftar can do some things and can't do other things. He's stuck. I mean, over here, there is some civil society taking place over here. Whatever Mr. Zumadi wants to believe or not, this is his business. But there is a civil society over here. There are no militias over here. Haftar's sons may have influence. Okay, I understand that. But how much influence do they have? So it seems to me that the logical thing for Mr. Sarraj and his government is to move somewhere where he can generate due policy, that you starve those militias of money. You keep away the money from them. This is very important.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, do you want a Libya?
Okay,
or do
let me
you
ask
want a
Juma.
separate Libya?
Okay, Juma, we have the idea from Mansour that Haftar is the lesser of two evils. You don't like him. It's not pretty, but guess what? There's a bit more law and order in the East, something that's clearly not at play in the West.
Well, for the last 4 years, we had a government in the East based in Al-Bayda, Atni government, a government which is recognized by Haftar and by the parliament and by Aguila Saleh. Now, ask Mansour and ask anybody else how effective that government has been. Well, how much has it done for the people of the East? So, you know, you can't fool anybody about that. That's not a solution. We don't have to choose between two evils. We have to go for what we really need, and the best solution is to actually have neither of the evils and start straight away, which is 7 years late, to reactivate, to empower the police service and all the security services which are concerned with the security of the citizens and the security of institutions. That is the main thing. Now, we Libyans can learn from other experiences. The UN is familiar with those experiences. For example, in Rwanda, they had a horrific civil war, over 1 million people killed. They have so many militias, and the UN helped to empower the police force and disarm over 120,000 members of militias. What we need in Libya is to simultaneously empower the police service and all the security institutions, official security institutions, empower them with international community backing. At the same time, threaten those militias if they do not disarm, if they do not move away from these institutions which they control now. They will be accountable to international community. They will be accountable by sanctions or even by bringing criminal charges. I mean, the ICC has arrest warrants against individuals in Libya, and the UN knows very well in detail who these militia leaders are, who the culprits are, who the bad ones are. We all know them. They don't need our help even to know them. They know them chapter and verse. So all we need is action and being active. What we need is serious international community will to stabilize Libya and get it sorted. Unfortunately, that international will has not been there. Ghassan Salama, without the backing of the major countries in the world. The UN, what is the UN? The UN is the major, strongest countries in the world who control it. Unless they are aligned about Libya, they have the same strategy towards Libya. Unless they have a sincere intention and will to stabilize Libya, nothing will happen, unfortunately.
Abdulkader Assad, in the short term, Does your country need international peacekeepers?
I mean, actually, that could be an idea if threats of like committing the militias didn't work. I mean, that's an idea. But let's just like I want to touch upon a very, very small point. Like in the East, it's not heaven in the East. Let's look at the parliament in the East that is supposed to be helping the Libyans to put an end to the transitional phase that's going on now. It's been like 3 months, and the HOR in Tobruk could not reach full quorum, could not reach the number of members in the parliament to pass a referendum law for the constitution. So Libya doesn't have a constitution because of the East-based HOR. How can you take the government to the East? How can you leave the militias control the capital of Libya and ask the government to move to the East? To have like under what control? So the East is not functioning as much as the West is. So that's the idea. Peacekeepers or no peacekeepers, this is not the idea. The idea is to have the international community understand what is the point in Libya. The point is not facilitating elections and rushing to elections now. The point is treating the problem. The problem is malicious control and arms. Okay. Arms that are everywhere in the city, in the capital, and in Libya.
Okay, well, dozens have been killed. People are displaced. There's chaos in Tripoli at the moment. The militias are, for the moment, their guns are down, but we don't know if they're going to pick them up again. And we'll be watching this closely. For the moment, Abdulkader Assad, Jamal Gamati, and Mansour Al-Kakhia, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still ahead on the program, the rebel leader of eastern Ukraine's breakaway province is killed. Did Kiev order his assassination? And how will it impact the conflict? And Argentina looks to the IMF to save its economy. Is an international bailout the way to prop up the peso? Alexander Zakharchenko is the latest in a line of rebel leaders in eastern Ukraine to meet an untimely death. Tens of thousands turned out at his funeral to pay their respects after the pro-Russian separatist was killed in a bombing. Moscow was quick to point the finger at Ukraine, with President Putin calling his murder a crime aimed at destabilizing a fragile regional peace. But Kiev blames infighting between separatists. So, who is behind his death? And how will the power vacuum impact the conflict? Shoaib Hassan takes a look.
In a cafe in eastern Ukraine, the region's top rebel leader has been killed in a bomb attack. Alexander Zakharchenko was the head of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. Pro-Russian separatists say Ukraine assassinated him. But the government in Kiev has denied any involvement.
So far, all the borders are closed. A few people have already been detained. They have already given evidence confirming that this was a Ukrainian act of sabotage.
Zakharchenko's Russian-backed faction took control of Donetsk following Ukraine's political crisis in 2014. That began with the ousting of then-President Viktor Yanukovych and the installation of a Western-backed government. But many in eastern Ukraine, along with Russia, refused to accept that change. Citing security threats, Moscow subsequently sent in troops to occupy Crimea and annexed it in March 2014. Fighting had already broken out in other parts of eastern Ukraine, including Donetsk and Luhansk. Initially, the Ukrainian military pushed back the rebels and took some territory, but Russian military support enabled the separatists to wrest back control by early 2015. The fighting has also fueled anarchy in the region, with militias controlling small swaths of territory. The UN says thousands of civilians have been killed and nearly 2 million have been displaced as the conflict rages on. So, what impact will the killing of the region's top rebel leader have? And could it trigger a new phase in the war? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, let's go to our panel now. Sergei Markov joins us from Moscow. He's the director of the Institute of Political Studies and a professor at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. And in New York, we have Andrei Dobryansky. He's a Ukrainian-American political analyst. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers once again. Sergei Markov, let me ask you, who killed Alexander Zakharchenko?
Enemies of Alexander Zakharchenko killed him, those who promised to kill him. It's Ukrainian intelligence service or Ukrainian military intelligence service or Ukrainian neo-Nazi group. They many times told that they're prepared to do it. Of course, it's clear political terrorism, the policy of governmental terrorism. And Russia and Moscow still didn't find no response to the terrorism. Russia cannot use same methods or to help to the Donbass to use same terroristic methods because we are not terrorists. But what to do if terrorists kill your friends many times, we still don't know.
Okay, Andrei, and we've also got the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stating that the bombing was Ukraine's provocation, obviously aimed at derailing the implementation of the Minsk agreements. It seems as if the Ukrainians have motive and capability, and so they took out this guy who they believe is illegally operating on Ukrainian soil. Is that the way you can maybe accept it being seen by many others?
I think you're quite right when you say that these individuals are acting illegally on Ukrainian soil. They are the terrorists that are active on Ukrainian territory. I think one thing I would point out to you, however, is that this terrorist who was recently killed, he was a self-proclaimed and proclaimed by Moscow as the leader of one of these occupying republics. He signed on to the Minsk Accord in a way of glorifying what his terror cell saw itself as a mini country state. The other person who was representing the Russian terrorists on Ukrainian soil, Igor Plotnitsky, was also a co-signer at that point to the Minsk Accords. He has since also disappeared. Removed from power, they say. Was that because of Ukrainians? No. That is because the instability of a terror network, which is what is operating on Ukrainian territory in areas that are surrounded by Russian military personnel.
Okay, and Sergei, other separatist leaders have been killed by bombs in recent history. Mikhail Tolstych and Arseny Pavlov, also known as Motorola. Now, according to the best available evidence, these guys were probably killed in infighting, right? Seen as warlords competing against each other. So, even though Ukraine might have motive, might not like these guys, is it possible, Mr. Markov, that what we're seeing is just infighting? These are warlords killing each other and vying for power in the east.
Not, I think it's impossible. We have some kind of partisan-style rebellion against neo-Nazi junta in the 2014, and but then it's these rebellion groups have been organized in a real army with real discipline, and this army, of course, has clear and strong support for the Russia, and Vladimir Putin many times mentioned, we will not allow military solution of Donbass. As Alexander Zakharchenko terrorist or not, everybody could see how he had been supported by people. More than 100,000 of the people come on his burying. Nevertheless, of course, people afraid that Kiev Bandera junta can organize again terroristic bombing in the crowds to kill some of the average people. So I think no chance. This is one of the arguments which used by terrorists. I want to say again, Zakharchenko, Alexander Zakharchenko, fought against neo-Nazis on his soil. His soil is Donbass, and he protected right of the people to live how they want to live. That's why Alexander Zakharchenko is Democrat, And he defended democracy. And democracy means that government has such policy which people demand from the government. But those who illegally grip power in Kiev in 2014, they used terroristic attack against Donbass people all these years. And to my regret, Russia still has no response how to react.
Okay.
Kiev junta is some kind of
okay, and you see them.
state,
okay, and it's interesting that you see them as a junta. That's fascinating. Andrei Dobriansky, we're seeing very clearly the Russian perspective on things in the east here. They believe that the government in Kiev in the west is actually illegitimate. With Minsk in mind and the reality on the ground, with the OSCE's reports, and they're saying they're still fighting every night. There are people in the so-called gray zone who are without electricity, without water, many displaced. More than 10,000 have been killed over these years. Is anybody committed to peace, Andrei?
Absolutely. Day by day, you see Ukraine deploying aid workers, especially for the towns that have been liberated from the oppression of the terrorists. New job opportunities, job training programs for those people have been set up, rebuilding the infrastructure in those areas as well. It is a very difficult situation when you have one rogue state, namely Russia, invading a sovereign territory of Ukraine. Would like to point out that over 100 nations at the United Nations have reaffirmed that Ukraine is its own sovereign territory. Russia does not get to dictate or to occupy it, so whatever is happening there is completely illegal on the side of the Russian invaders. But for me, it's less important to know what happened to these terrorists that are being mentioned today in the news cycle. It was interesting to hear that hundreds of thousands, earlier this morning it was tens of thousands at a funeral. By midnight it'll be 1 million people at this funeral. But that's not the person you should mourn. The person we should mourn are the 298 innocent people who were killed by these terrorists when their plane flew over eastern Ukraine. Over 80 of those were children under the age of 16. We will never know what happened to them specifically, nor will we know who are doing these killings in Ukraine right now, because Western observers are not allowed into these areas. Western observers would like to go to the sovereign territory of Ukraine, right up to the border, to see exactly what's happening there. And they are not allowed in because, again, a terrorist regime has been installed there by Moscow. Moscow openly talks about this. In the book by President Hollande of France, he mentioned that Putin openly spoke about it in the Minsk format, that Putin admitted that his forces were involved in the invasion of Ukraine. So it's not about these terrorists that are killed today. It's about the innocent people, as you mentioned, the over 10,000. The largest displacement in Europe since World War II, over 2 million people displaced in Ukraine because of these actions.
Sergei Markov, are Germany and France the right mediators to try and resolve the conflict right now in what they call the Normandy talks?
I think now Normandy talks is frozen because leaders of France and Germany didn't accuse terrorist attack which had been organized by a Kiev neo-Nazi junta. And that's why it means that we regarded France and Germany supported that Kiev killing his political opponents. And I want to stress to Mr. Dobriansky, terrorists is those who every night shelling by artillery the houses where people live. And it's exactly Ukrainian troops by order of Kiev junta. And be sure, Mr. Dobriansky.
And that could be verified by international monitors if you let them into that area.
Ukraine will be free from neo-Nazis. And the people as you are will be
right. So on the territory of Ukraine that Western monitors can go into,
and
in those areas that are being shelled by the Russians, Western monitors can verify that. They can't verify that in areas that are occupied by Russians.
Again, your support of neo-Nazi terrorists wouldn't help them. Now it helps them a little bit. And now you are keeping responsibility for the killing such hero of anti-fascism movement and rebellion as Alexander Zakharchenko. You can even dance with neo-Nazis from Azov and another neo-Nazis battalion, which is used by Kiev gun. But it would help you because history is against people as you are.
Andre.
Yeah, so the person being hailed as a hero is a known felon with a criminal record. Again, my colleague on the other side does not recognize the innocent people who are dying every day because of Russian shelling, nor the innocent members of the European Union, the Malaysians, Australians who were shot down in that airplane. If the Russians were to allow international monitors, all these accusations that are being levied today by my colleague on the other side can be verified. But they're not verified because Russia will not allow international monitors. They are just saying that these things are happening. Ukraine, on the other hand, has allowed international monitors, and that's why we can document all these international abuses that are happening to this day.
Sergei Markov and Andrei Dobriansky.
Of course.
Sergei, unfortunately, we're out of time. I have to move on.
Yeah, of course, Mr. Dobriansky lied. All international observers are free to come to the territory of free Donbass.
Okay, well, let's have a round two next time with both of you. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So thanks for joining us once again on the Newsmakers.
These few months, all the storms were unleashed at the same time. But that's no reason to lose hope. We must mature as a society and not continue living above our means, nor continue living with corruption.
From the Turkish lira to the Argentine peso, currencies in emerging markets are in crisis. In the last year, the peso has lost roughly half its value. The central bank has raised interest rates to 60%, the highest anywhere in the world. But the tumbling currency has forced President Mauricio Macri to take further action. His government announced a raft of spending cuts, hoping to stabilize the fragile economy. He's even asked the International Monetary Fund for an early release of a loan package. But this has only raised some investors' fears. Many in the country blame the IMF for the country's economic crash in 2001. So could an IMF bailout breathe new life into the economy or hamstring it even more? To discuss this, we're joined by Arturo Porzecanski. He's the director of the International Economics Program at the American University in Washington. And in Paris, we're joined by TRT World's editor-at-large, Craig Kapiras. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Arturo, let me begin with you. In a nutshell, how did Argentina get here?
Well, the problem was the poisoned inheritance that the current administration received after 12 years of populism, courtesy of Mr. and Mrs. Kirchner. And their decision was not to deal with it, at least not some of the more painful aspects of it. And so they made some initial reforms, like they freed up the foreign exchange market and removed the capital controls and import controls, but they did not deal with the heavy legacy of very high government spending, very high taxes, and very many distortions throughout the economy. These things came back to haunt them now.
And Arturo, for some, getting another IMF loan is like going back to a poisonous ex who messed up your whole life. Is that what's going to happen to Argentina?
Well, first of all, I think that debate is pretty much over now because it happened in May. They concluded the agreement in June. And now the problem is that the program is off the rails. It has to be redone. And also Argentina is asking for more money to be delivered up front than has already been done. So the IMF is part of the story now, and let's hope that they make the best of it.
Okay, so Craig, are we only talking about Argentina when it comes to Argentina's currency crisis and the economic wobbles? Or can we not talk about Argentina without talking about Turkey, for example, or even South Africa and beyond? Is there an emerging markets crisis? Help me understand this.
Yes, there is an emerging market crisis. There is a contagion going on. But and there is linkage between all of these countries. But let's start with Argentina. The history of Argentina from its founding has been a litany of corruption, and corruption that has led to economic failure. What is the specific problem right now affecting Argentina, Turkey, and all these other emerging markets? The problem is they need to win back investors. They need to win back their confidence. So what we're seeing right now is a fierce battle against the collapse of investor confidence in these countries. And the orthodox mechanisms of the past, the IMF, no longer work. The radical solutions offered by Turkey and other countries also no longer work. Why? Because the more they try to win back investor confidence, the more they lose it, the more their currency is devalued, and the higher the interest rates have to be pushed up. In Argentina's case, you're looking at 60%. 60% is the rate the mob gives you.
What about tightening of the belts? Austerity, Craig, does that work?
Tightening the belt? Well, that is what the IMF wants. It's called conditionality and structural reform. Those are the bureaucratic terms the IMF uses. In the old days, you sent a gunboat upriver when you wanted to get your money back from a country that had welched on you. Now the IMF comes in and they say you have to do this, this, and this for us to give you the bailout money, which, by the way, you're going to be paying vigorish on. Look at Greece. You're going to be paying, in Greece's case, they're paying off the vigorish and the principal for the next 60 years. Argentina and Turkey share three things in common. They both have a large current account deficit. They have ghoulishly dollar-denominated debt, and they have double-digit inflation. What Argentina is saying, well, we're going to cut our government ministries by 50%, raise export taxes, raise interest rates, and we're going to secure this $50 billion credit line. That's orthodoxy, IMF orthodoxy as formulated at Bretton Woods in 1944. What Turkey is saying is no, inflation cannot be controlled by higher rates and, in fact, should be lowered. Now, the Turkish central bank might well raise interest rates, but even the hint of that still hasn't ended the slumping lira. And in Argentina's case, going the orthodox route, it hasn't helped the peso.
Okay, so that's an interesting point.
This is why we're looking at a
good
contagion.
point. So Arturo, you have Turkey trying one approach as a solution and Argentina another, and both the currencies still doing badly. What does that tell us?
That the solutions were the wrong ones. And the orthodox medicine of tightening budgets and tightening the monetary policy was tried too little, too late. So obviously, it's not a good time for the emerging markets, but there are some whose currencies have gone down 5, 10, 15%. And there are others, like Turkey and Argentina, where it's gone down 40, 50, 60%. And the difference is what the authorities had done before the wave hit and also what they're doing currently. I think that in both cases, the confidence of investors has been lost, and it will have to be hard won. And I think the IMF will try to do its best to be helpful here. This is the Argentines' plan. They've made it very clear. It's not something imposed by the IMF. I would say the IMF has been very soft on Argentina so far. They probably will get harder now, but they need the hard medicine.
Have they been soft on them, Craig?
Look it. This is not a question of ideology, which a lot of people try to frame it as. The fact is that the criteria and statistics the IMF uses to define success to their members and their bankers are the same criteria and statistics that spell doom to the very people that help is designed to save. And I want to go back to Greece here for a moment. The conventional wisdom right now is, oh, Greece is all right. They're back on the road to recovery. Don't say that in Greece, because they're looking at 60 years of paying off interest and principal. And that is what Turkey would get sucked into if it took out an IMF loan, which it's not apparently not going to do. And, you know, it's a question of, you know, they're making a desert and calling it peace, as Tacitus said. You know, yeah, but are the Argentine people willing to take a medicine that's going to kill them?
Right.
That is a legitimate question.
Right. And Arturo, if we look at Greece as a possible example, the economy contracts, right? When we look at austerity measures, we saw restlessness on the streets for successive Greek governments. Even when Syriza came in, they found an angry population because they had to play the game and become pragmatic. Are we going to see Macri face restlessness on the streets of Argentina as the Argentines tighten their belts and take their medicine from the IMF?
I imagine so. The recession has already started, and the labor unions are restless because they're losing ground to inflation. But this is the situation. The good options have already lapsed. Hopefully, it will not be a multi-year process like in the case of Greece. I think Greece's problems were much more serious, and also the constraint under which Greece has operated, namely within the Eurozone, are much greater. Argentina now is not like in 2001, where they were confined by their one-to-one relationship with the dollar. Now they have exchange rate, monetary, fiscal, and other freedoms that a member of the Eurozone does not have. So I think they will have, hopefully, some kind of V-type contraction of economic activity and also of inflation. And a year from now, we will look on them as, well, having gone through a painful experience, but at least something good came out of it.
Craig, do you agree that the good options have already lapsed?
I think Argentina is going to suffer. I think that what we're seeing in emerging markets has to do with the velocity of currency, the velocity of the US dollar. The fact that the dollar is the global currency, as was agreed upon at Bretton Woods in 1944. There is no way getting away from that. In fact, you know, discussing alternatives to the US dollar as a global currency is really the stuff of an edgy comedy routine right now. But you put the comedy aside and the tragedy aside, we don't know what's going to happen, but what's clear here is the cascade effect is such that at some point in the future, there is definitely going to have to be another modern day sort of Bretton Woods meeting to discuss this problem, because it is a problem and it's going to get worse.
Craig, is the dollar being nefariously, deliberately weaponized against countries such as Turkey? That's a view here on the streets. People would concede. They'll say, listen, yes, you know, we probably have bad policies, but it's also the Trump administration using the power of the dollar against us. Is there truth to that?
Again, let's take the ideology off the table. It is absolutely true that Donald Trump has fully weaponized the US dollar and is attempting to extraterritorially enforce US law in order to promote his foreign policy directives. He has militarized the economy. He has militarized the international status of the dollar. And let's take Turkey off the table. There are many other countries who have said this. The French have said it. The Germans have said it. The British are saying it privately. Many corporations are saying it outside of the United States. It's reached a point right now where you have executives from major European and Asian corporations being told by their legal departments not to travel to the United States because they may be brought in for questioning, perhaps, as in the case of Halkbank, even jailed, or in the case of BNP Paribas, jailing and fines of billions and billions of dollars, because the United States weaponized the dollar and said, you're breaking U.S. sanctions. Donald Trump has done absolutely nothing to de-escalate this crisis. Everything from his trade wars with NAFTA and everything else, this is a major problem.
Right. Arturo, very finally, is it going to be worthwhile for us to have another program where we discuss the weaponization of the dollar under Trump and whether there should be alternatives to the dollar?
Yes, I think that should have been left for another program. I thought we were going to talk about Argentina. And certainly
but that's why I'm asking you for another program, yeah.
Yeah, Argentina is certainly not a victim here of any such weaponization. They brought this upon themselves, and now they've got to get themselves out of it with help from the IMF. If they don't want the help from the IMF, they don't have to have it. But they tried swimming against the current without the fund, and it didn't work. Now they're going to try it with the fund. I hope it works for their own sake and all of the rest of us.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to wrap, but it's been really good picking your brains. Arturo Porzecanski and Craig Capitas, thanks for joining us. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Colin Kaepernick is the new face of Nike's latest ad campaign. Is the company taking a political stance or just cashing in on controversy? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.